So here we are with section number 1, and so let's just dive right in here. First things first, I just want to point out one thing. And so what I've got here is our first section pulled up here from the small sections page. And so what we have here is an F sharp in our key signature. That means that every single F that we find is going to be sharped. And so first thing we can do with this is just make sure, look through and see if you can find any. And if you'll notice, there's one right there. The second note in the bass is an F sharp instead of an F. And so instead of playing your first fret, you will play your second fret in this piece, always and forever for this piece. So then the next thing that we've got to deal with is this issue, and I mentioned it earlier, is the down stems and up stems, right? We have down stems and we have up stems. So instead of just barreling through this thing, then instead let's actually look at the bass by itself. And this is normally I would just say do the right hand first and then the left hand and clap the rhythms and all that kind of stuff. But in this piece, because there is such a clear difference between the melody and the accompaniment, and the melody and the bass are the same thing in this one, that I really want to look at them separately first. So here we have the bass only. And so to begin with, let's just clap this rhythm and count it out loud. So we have, this is 1 and 2. This falls on the and, 3 and that's how to count this. We have 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. And this is where our section stops, is right there. Why did we stop right there? Why not just keep going through the next, or why didn't we stop at the long note? That's because we want to connect our sections really well. And so the next section will start here and then move forward from that. So we want to actually practice joining the sections so that we don't tune out. It's easy to, if we stop in a certain place every time when we practice, it's very easy to relax at that spot, da-da-da-dum, and then you just kind of tune out by habit because it means I'm done because it's the spot. And so instead, we want to always be continuing forward and connecting our things forward. Also, it allows us to decide how we're going to handle the connection of the sections to that note. So, one more time clapping this. Ready, here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. That's it. The next thing that we're going to do is to actually put our dynamics into this before we even play it. And so there's a couple of little rules that we want to be aware of concerning dynamics. The first is whenever things are going up, you want to approach the top note. You want to go up, you want to get softer. And that's why we have this right here. As we approach this top note here, we want to get softer to it. Now, we have a couple of different things going on here. We want the music to always be moving forward. And so, moving forward oftentimes means getting louder because that's exciting. If we lean in, that's exciting. And so we want things to always be getting louder. But to get things getting louder, we have to always be making them softer as well. So it's this balance between the two. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to think, okay, this line right here is going to be getting quieter. So let's just do that. We just play this one, boom, and then we get quieter here on that one. There's another rule as well called the long short. You may have heard me talking about this. That means that as we have a long note, which is this note right here, when we have that and then we have these short notes after it, these three guys, the first one of the short notes is quiet because it finishes that, and then the next ones go forward. And then when we crescendo from there, or do whatever we want to do from there. So we're going to make this note right here, we're going to make it quiet. Now if you'll notice there's this big wedge right here, but that is actually for the accompaniment that went above it and not this. So we're going to actually get quieter to this note. So here we go. Are you ready? Here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. And so we got quieter to this note, and then we got quieter to this note. Now if you'll notice, it makes it very quiet. It doesn't mean that it has to be quiet, it just has to be quieter than the notes before it. So how about this right here? What if we crescendo these first couple of notes and then decrescendo up to there? So now we have a little swell. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 1. Just like that. Let's do that one more time with a clean score so you can actually see what's going on here. So now we have, just to do it again, we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. Get louder, get softer. That's what this is right here. So swell up to it, but then back off at the end. And 3 and 1. Right back in. And then as we go on, we want to get softer to this note. So this note is basically very quiet at the end. There's also, so we talked about the long short right here, but then we could also say that there's one right here, right? And actually, it's not, because of this. There's another rule that kind of trumps it, and that is this syncopation right here. So a syncopation, when something comes in on the offbeat. Well, sometimes when we come off on the offbeat, we might want to actually accent it so that it sounds very intentional. It doesn't sound like we're kind of stumbling in at some weird time. So instead of actually being quiet and doing a long short right here, instead what you can do is actually accent that note. So you can pop that F sharp and work with it that way. Let's try that. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. That's kind of like an interruption. It could be a little more conversational that way. This was where we get into the nuance of interpretation, and what do you think? You know, we could do it a couple of different ways. And 2 and 3 and 1. I would definitely back off to that high D though. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. So you can actually punch that F sharp in there if you'd like to, and then just do a straight decrescendo, or start it off a little bit less, get louder in the middle, and then back off to the top. Now I'm giving you choices because you get choices. Because this is music. It's not a concrete science, but there are still some rules that we can bring to bear to really make educated decisions. And these are the decisions that you would need to make. I would practice it both ways with this and see which one you like better. In certain instances, I would do one or the other. There'll be other spots where it's just concrete, and I'll just say, do it this way, trust me. But this is a spot, do it one of those two ways. So now let's look at the top here. So now we have these lines right here, this accompaniment line, and these are just open strings. And the rule on these is, whenever you have repeated notes, you want to crescendo them. Crescendo the repeated notes. Let's get a different color. Crescendo these repeated notes. Crescendo these repeated notes. So we have 1 and 2. Push them forward. Ta ta. Ta 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 ta. Don't get them too loud too fast, and never get them too crazy loud. So they might end up at a mezzo forte or something, but start them very quietly. The range and the contrast is going to be the way to go on it. So, and so putting that all together, we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 2 and 3 and that's quiet. The E. So here's the thing. This note is loud. This note is soft. Although, because this is the melody down here, you still want this to be louder than this, but this still has to be soft. So here we're dealing with different things, right? That's why the dynamics, you couldn't on the main page, you can't just take it on face value. This has to get louder, but at its very loudest, it still needs to be quieter than these because of its role as the accompaniment instead of the melody. So we want to keep it behind the melody, but it still needs to grow and swell and be interesting. And so that's what we're gonna be doing with that. A lot of considerations in here, yes? So these are the musical devices that I was talking about. All these little things you can do to do it. Practice this as if there is nothing left in the piece. Just this right here. Practice the top by itself. And the question is, how quietly can you start? Because that would determine kind of how you grow over time. There's also one last thing I want to talk about with these repeated notes, and that is that whenever we have this big long group, like right here, whenever we have this big long group of repeated notes, one of the things that we want this to do is to bring us forward toward the next stuff. We don't just want to go blah, 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 blah. And that's why we crescendo, right? Like we were just talking about. Well, there's another thing that you can also do, and that is group them in your mind instead of just a one big group of 5 right here, or instead of a group of 6, including that first note. Instead, think of the last 3 going forward to the 1, just like this did right over here in the melody, right? And 3 and 1. Think about this the exact same way. And 3 and 1. So then when you have it, you have 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. And so you group it in your head. You could actually even stop in your practice. So that you actually separated it in your practice. You wouldn't play it that way for people, but to separate it in your practice so that you can actually think and then to here. And I use those words and then to here a lot. And then to here. So boom, chuck, chuck. And then to here, chuck, chuck. And then to here. That kind of thing. So that you're constantly knowing where you're going and you're constantly moving forward in the music. And that is the first section. Practice it well. I'll see you in section 2 coming up.